All right, hello and welcome to PDN Live. I'm Sonia. I am PDN Social Media Manager. Tonight we have with us our Executive Director, Rob Pincus, and we also have our two PDN contributors, Grant Cunningham and Derek Poole. Say hello, everybody.
Hi there.
Okay, Rob, I don't know if you want to do more of an introduction or...
Well, let's see. Everybody probably has some idea who I am. Executive Director of Personal Defense Network. Personal Defense Network has been around in one form or another as a DVD series since 2005, so we're in our kind of full decade of that project. We've got about 80 DVDs in the training library, and obviously that's not 80 DVDs with me. We have a lot of great contributors in a lot of different areas of expertise. Several of them, of course, are firearms instructors, as well as we just taped some more stuff with medical guy. We've got unarmed stuff. We've got legal issues, mental aspects of training, doctors, martial artists, all kinds of things. And two of our contributors are here with us tonight. This is our second PDN Live question and answers. We've been soliciting questions from social media, from our members, email, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, everywhere. And we announced a couple weeks ago that we were going to have these two guys with us. And of course, they're pretty well known in the Personal Defense Network field as far as the community that we have, social media, that we'll see these guys' names. Certainly seen them articles and video clips, as well as Grant's done a DVD with us. And Derek is also one of our lead combat-focused shooting instructor guys, and Grant's been part of the combat-focused shooting community for quite some years too. So Grant Cunningham and Derek Poole are here with us as well, answering questions. And why don't you guys give a quick idea of what you're bringing to the table tonight and your training emphasis. Grant first.
My name is Grant Cunningham. My company is Personal Security Institute, and I train primarily defensive shooting instruction around the country. I'm probably best known for my expertise with the double-action revolver. It's something that I like and something that I got known for early on. But of course, I teach a lot of classes, rifle, and of course, I even teach those auto-loading handgun things every once in a while. I teach here in Oregon and all over the country. In fact, this weekend I'll be in Arizona. That's where I'll be.
What you're bringing to the table tonight, your training emphasis. Grant first.
Security Institute, and I train.
Derek?
Hey, Derek Poole from Echo 5 Training Group. Like you said, I work with the combat focused shooting team. My emphasis is with everyday civilians with firearms, handgun and rifle, but I also do work with law enforcement and LEO, but most of that is through ICE training with Rob. I travel around, primarily though I'm based out of Southwest Florida and Florida in general. I like it because it's warm, usually. But yeah, you see me on a lot of videos as students. I play Rob's students on a lot of the PDN videos. Most recently, the defensive training with Steel.
Cool, and then both you guys will be teaching as part of the Personal Defense Network training tour starting up in late March. In fact, Derek, I think you've got the first class on the tour this year, March 20th down in Florida.
Correct. And then in St. Augustine, where we always kick it off. And then you take over for the rest of the week with some carbine, APH, some other things. Yep.
All right, cool. Sonia, why don't you let everybody know what we're going to do here as far as the Q&A.
Awesome. Okay, so all the questions that came in, no one has seen them, and I'm just going to start asking sort of based on category as I can. We had many questions come in as we did the last live session that we did about concealed carry. So I think maybe if you three could maybe explain maybe what concealed carry is, what rights people have, and they all vary state to state, but if you could give just maybe a general, just a general discussion about concealed carry and what that means.
All right, as the executive director, I'm going to break that up a little bit. Let me take the big picture view, and then Grant, I'll have you maybe talk a little bit about the important things people need to train getting ready for their concealed carry endeavor, and then Derek, why don't you take some gear issues that people deal with. From the big picture point of view, we're in a place today in the United States of America where concealed carry is by far as popular as it's ever been. It's certainly a lot easier now to get a concealed carry permit across the country in general, and many, many states very specifically, than it was when I first started carrying concealed in the 90s. And really, over the last 2 decades, we've seen this dramatic increase in availability through what we call shall issue laws, where the states have decided that they are going to a circumstance where citizens will be allowed to carry a gun unless there's a reason precluding them from being able to do it legally. And that's the way most states deal with concealed carry. Every state has some provision for concealed carry now, thanks to some federal court orders over the last, let's say, 18 months. But some states are still incredibly hard to get those concealed carry permits. But the shall issue states prevent local municipalities from precluding people from getting their concealed carry permit or having to prove that they earned the right to get a concealed carry permit. So that's the big picture. It's incredibly popular, and that means in our classes we're seeing a lot of people who are new to guns, didn't grow up with guns, and might not have pursued the opportunity to carry a gun for the defense of themselves or others had those laws not changed, and that takes us to training. Grant.
Sure. When we talk about concealed carry, we talked about training for concealed carry, we're talking about some very specific things. Remember that concealed carry is about protecting yourself and the loved ones who happen to be around you at that time. And so we talk about the idea of context, which is those things that relate to the kinds of incidents you're going to have or expect to have if you're carrying concealed, those sorts of attacks that happen. So it's important, first of all, to train in the context that you expect to use a skill. For instance, if I'm training for concealed carry, I'm not going to be training to do room entries, for instance. I'm not going to be training to take sniper shots from a bell tower. I'm going to be training in those things that I expect to use, which is that attack that happens somewhere between that 3 to 7 yard range roughly, which is where most of them happen from the data we have. An attack that you really didn't have a great idea what was going to happen until it actually did. So this is not something that you get ready and get set for and all that kind of thing. So training in context under the condition you actually expect to use it is incredibly important. It's incredibly important. Again, we're talking concealed carry, we're not talking open carry. So it's important also to train with the gear, with the kind of garments that you're going to typically wear to conceal that garment, conceal that gun. That's important too. Being able to get to the gun efficiently, being able to get the gun out of whatever garments you're wearing. Very, very important to be able to do those things. So again, that's part of that training in context. We're training because we're carrying a concealed gun, because we're carrying a gun that has something covering it so other people can't see it. We need to train that way. So train concealed carry from the way you're going to carry it, and train it for the kinds of attacks that you can reasonably expect to encounter.
Cool. Derek, some gear issues?
Gear, like with the popularity of CCW, there's been an explosion of gear. Like I can remember back when I first started, appendix carry, I wanted to try it, but nobody made appendix holsters. So it was a Blade Tech strong side holster that I, made as into an appendix rig. The cool thing is, regardless of gender, body type, size, there's a holster or something made for that person that will work, so they don't have to carry out in the open. The biggest thing is, I hear a lot of big guys. I'm a big guy myself. I'm not flat-stomached. I can't appendix carry because of my size. There are a lot of appendix carry rigs out there made by big, well-known people that will work for big guys. That's the big one. Other for women, a lot of women say, I need a purse carry because I can't fit it to the way I wear my clothes. I don't want to change how I dress just so I can tote a gun around. So with a little bit of time, effort, and energy of searching the internet, looking at reviews, there's something for everybody out there.
Cool. So let's expand on that a little bit more. I have some more specific questions about concealed carry. This next one comes from Minister John from Ohio. He's asking what a church can do to allow its members to legally carry in its building. And maybe if you want to talk generally about churches, I don't know if you would know what the Ohio law is per se.
I don't know what the Ohio laws are. Grant or Derek might. The laws do vary. Usually what we find is that many churches have security ministries. I've done a lot of training, usually for free, to churches that had members of their security ministry that were in my classes, or in some cases hosting classes. When I go into town to do a 2 or 3, 4-day session of classes, sometimes in the evening we'll do a couple hours, or we'll add a day in where we'll spend with that security group for the church. And obviously in that case, a lot of those will be volunteers. Private security that's hired for churches is something that's very different, and a lot of churches will also take advantage of off-duty police officers that are in their congregation. As far as legally changing state laws where churches are told they may not have guns on property, that obviously is something that's going to vary from state to state. But my impression has been that if the church itself has its employees or its designated volunteers, that it can authorize in a security capacity to have firearms on the premises, that just like a school can hire security officers to carry guns on their premises, that would sort of work around general preclusions about having guns in places of worship that apply to people who aren't there with a specific security tasking.
Okay. Do Grant or Derek, do you want to expand on that at all, or?
I'm Jewish. I can't talk about guns in churches. From a general standpoint, however, for instance, in the state of Oregon, I know that a lot of churches here do have security teams, and I think Rob called it a security ministry. I know a lot of churches here have that. It's very organized, and they sometimes even go out and train together, which is a really good thing. And in some states, as Rob mentioned, there's sometimes provision in law that people can have guns in church with the written permission of the hierarchy or something. People can look into that too.
Yeah, I don't go to church, so I don't know. My wife isn't home, so I can't ask her.
A lot of good we're doing here, aren't we?
My fallback is check the law and follow the law. I don't know.
I'm only allowed in churches when I'm invited for training, apparently. That's the thing.
Okay. This next question is from Steve. It says, do you recommend a laser sight for a concealed carry handgun? If so, under what circumstances? For what kind of gun owners?
Who wants to go first?
I've sort of run a little hot and cold on the whole laser issue. I started with lasers very, very early on. In fact, back when Crimson Trace was the first company to really make practical handgun lasers. At the time, the vice president of the company, Clyde Harris, and I actually sat down and we did the range work necessary for what would become the Crimson Trace training program. So I've been using lasers quite a bit, and still I've run sort of hot and cold on them. I do have lasers on some of my guns, and I think in some situations they are incredibly valuable. Particularly in times where there's a difference in lighting on the gun versus on the threat. Sometimes they come in very handy. They come in handy for some people with certain types of vision issues. It's not something that I feel a great need to have for most people. I think you have to take this sort of on a case-by-case basis. Do you have the sort of situation that suggests you might need that help, either vision or because of the kinds of environments you are in all the time, that kind of thing. Like I said, I have a laser on 2 of my guns, but not on the rest. And I've never felt that I really needed one. However, I understand and I recognize and I sometimes tell my students, listen, there are some cases where you might very well be able to make really good use of that laser. In that case, great. I don't recommend it. In other words, if somebody says, what are the accessories I need for my concealed carry gun, should I get a laser? And my general patent answer is no, unless you really have a need for it.
Okay. Anyone else have a comment, or is that good?
I agree with Grant 100%. I have lasers on 2 of my guns, and the 2 guns that actually have them are the ones that are micro guns that have very poor sights on them to begin with. So I agree with Grant 100%. It's a great tertiary thing to have, but do you have to have it case by case?
Okay. So is there best gun for concealed and carry? Does it depend on the person and what they like?
Oh boy, we could do the rest of the hour on that. Jeez. I think we look at guns in terms. I think there are some guns that are better suited in some respects for defensive use in general. In some cases, they have attributes that make them better for concealed carry. So we look at, first of all, of course, does the gun fit your hand? That's really the most important thing. Is it reliable? Is it of a size that you can conceal reasonably? And what I mean by that is, the extremely large guns, a lot of people have trouble concealing them. I certainly do. I'm not a big guy. So we look at that aspect of it too. What is the best concealed gun, or is there a best concealed carry gun? No, because a lot of it is going to have to do with that hand fit and with the individual. We can narrow it down a little bit. I know Derek and Rob and I are probably going to agree on this. If it's an auto-loading pistol, I like to see a striker-fired pistol, a Palmer-framed striker-fired pistol. They've proven to be very reliable over a long period of time. They're relatively easy to shoot, and they come in all kinds of different sizes. And that's where I would go if somebody wanted an auto pistol. If somebody wants a revolver, that's another whole discussion.
Okay. Does anyone else have a comment, or should we move on to a different topic?
I'm pretty sure this is one that we all three agree on across the board.
Okay.
Yeah, this one's pretty easy, actually.
Okay. Let's move on to training. We had several questions about training. The first one I'll ask is sort of a scenario situation from Al. He's a middle school teacher in Missouri. He's asking, might you suggest some ideas on ways to address a situation, armed and unarmed, as well as some of what we should consider when trying to keep our students out of harm's way. It seems recent police trainers provided statistics that the average shot in recent situations is about 18 inches. I think we need to think about resistance and interference in such a situation. Do you have some suggestions or strategy on what we should do? I don't think it will ever happen, but waiting to consider my options. So do you have any suggestions on if there's a threat at a school, what teachers should do?
This is a great one for. Oh, you're back! Yay! Hi, Rob.
Go ahead, Jared.
This is a great one for Rob, because Rob has a program, the school attacker response course, which really addresses everything this guy is talking about. And Rob or Derek can probably address that better than I can.
So yes, SARC is a program that we started in the aftermath of the Sandy Hook episode, the school shooting, the active spree killing that was going on out there. And what happened was we had a lot of students of ours that had kids in school that asked, what happens next? What do we tell our kids about this incident? What should we say when they come home from school today or the next day and ask about not only what happened there, but what if that happens in my school, mom and dad? And it really wasn't something I was interested in wading into professionally as far as ICE training company or designing a program or anything like that. But there was so much of a cry for information that we did come up with a relatively simple program that talks about the importance of not just hiding and hoping. So not hiding under a table or in the corner of the room and hoping that the good guys get there, the SWAT team members or the school security officer gets there to stop the bad guy. I feel like kids deserve more than that. I feel like personal defense isn't just a right, it's a responsibility. You teach kids early on to meet that responsibility, even in the face of overwhelming odds, to not just simply be a victim and let evil win, that our society is going to get better, that we're going to have less bullying in the school. If you're telling a kid to stand up to a guy with a semi-automatic rifle who kicks the door in and tries to shoot him and his classmates and his teacher, you're telling those kids that they can do something about that. They don't have to just hide. How is the kid that's 3 inches taller on the playground really going to get away with much? I think we teach those little girls to fight back in school. I think we'll see less domestic abuse, less sexual assault. I think teaching self-defense is a responsibility, and not teaching kids to always hide or always look for help or always wait on someone else is a big thing. And that's what SARC really, that's the message that SARC has allowed us to push forward. And we've seen a lot of schools and a lot of programs nationwide not necessarily adopt our program per se, but programs that are similar that say, get away if you can, and that's the evade. Take proactive steps ahead of time to make it easier for you to barricade yourself and make it harder for the bad guy to get to you. So evade and barricade, and then lastly, respond if necessary. Everything from, there are a lot of people on the internet were kind of making fun of a school system that was encouraging kids to stockpile heavy cans of food, canned food that they could use as projectile tools to throw at someone who came into their classroom with a weapon. Well, that may not be as good as a gun, but you're not going to give a 7th grader a gun. So give them whatever tools you can. Give them a backpack full of books to stop the bullets and a handful of cans to throw at the bad guy, and teach them that that's better than nothing. And then, of course, teaching the teachers how to respond all the way up to and including those that in certain parts of the country where it'd be appropriate for them to choose to have responsibly armed and trained teachers, that's certainly a viable option and a great option in terms of personal defense. We know armed personal defense is a good idea. In the school setting, just simply teaching the kids not to relinquish their responsibility to protect themselves and each other to the police that may or may not make it on time is the most important thing.
Okay. Does anyone else have a comment or?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I wanted to throw in here is that a lot of times the people in the shooting community, in the defensive shooting community, will often pine or they're very upset at the fact that, well, we can't have guns in school. And sometimes I think there's this sort of this defeatist attitude that says, well, because we can't have guns in school, nothing else is going to work. And I think that something like this, where you're looking at alternatives, where you're looking at other things you can do besides having the gun, is incredibly important. And I think it's important for the shooting community and the defensive shooting community not to lose sight of the fact that doing something is better than doing nothing. I think that's really important.
Okay. Derek, did you have a comment?
No, I think they both covered it really well. My father was a school principal for 35 years, and when he heard about Rob's program, he looked it over, and he actually sent videos to some of his former colleagues. It's really good and important information to get out there to them if they, anything's better than nothing type thing.
Right.
Especially from Maryland is where he was the school principal. So.
Okay. All right. This next question, sort of another training thing. It comes from another Grant. He is asking, can more scenario-based training be done effectively and safely in a dry fire environment or classroom to get students to think about different real-life situations and even do blue gun or empty gun run-throughs to bring them to life?
Derek, you want to jump into that? Derek's been working with us on our reality-based training instructor development program for the last year and a half or so, and I know you have some insight there.
Yeah, blue gun, it doesn't really matter, right? It's setting up the scenario properly and executing it. You could, like Rob says in the class, you could use a banana and shoot a banana at somebody. It doesn't really matter. It's a matter of setting up the scenario properly, putting in the right controls, and then running through it to get the right emotional feeling from the student, get the student immersed in it, and it can be very valuable, and you can get some good training out of it.
I'd agree with that. Setting up the scenario is really incredibly important. Deciding what you really want to learn from this before you actually just kind of put people in a room and have everybody sort of go berserk. Really important to decide why you're doing it, what you expect to learn from it, and then build the scenario from there. I think it's incredibly valuable. It's when we think about it, the scenario training is very much like a fire drill. We do fire drills all the time at home. That's scenario-based training. I mean, that's reality-based training. We come up with a scenario and we practice what we're going to do with it. And we have very specific things that we expect to learn. We do the same thing in schools. We do fire drills in schools all the time. So this is really just that next step. Okay, what do we do to this? And the same principles apply.
Okay. So this next question is from Mike. He's asking, if you can't get to the range, like do you have to go to the range to keep your skills in check, or can you do home drills, or what's the best way to keep your skills at a high level when you might not have time to get to the range?
If you want to learn how to ski, you got to find snow. I don't support the concept that we should be telling people otherwise. There are certainly things that you can do at home without making the gun go bang. We have a DVD, Claude Werner, one of our contributors, we have a DVD at Personal Defense Network on dry fire training methodologies that make sense and that are practical and that are safe and controlled for the home environment. And it would be foolish to insinuate that there's no value that can come from those things, but I would definitely say there's a lot of bad habits that you can develop in those environments because you aren't getting the feedback from the gun. You aren't getting, you aren't managing recoil. You aren't getting the stimulus to do a malfunction. You aren't getting a stimulus to do the reload. And in many cases, with literal dry fire, you are getting the stimulus to perform a malfunction drill, but you're not performing the malfunction drill. So you can really be creating bad training scars in that environment much more easily than you can when you're actually shooting a real gun at a real range. So if someone's going to talk about practicing 10 minutes every day at home, there are things they can do. But then once a week going to the range, that's great. If what they're saying is, I'll go to the range once a year, but I want to practice every week at home and not drive an hour or spend the money on the bullets, then you're not going to be practicing shooting. You're practicing something else. You're practicing the component parts. And maybe even going back to that scenario training or the reality-based training stuff, you could do reality-based training in a bunch of ways with your family, with, what are you going to do if the alarm goes off, get to your room, get your personal defense gun ready, get your cell phone call, what are you going to say to the police when you call the police, when you're barricaded your family in your room. You can do a lot of cool things when you can't get to the range, but shooting isn't one of
them. Okay.
Grant?
Oh, anyone else? Sorry.
Yeah, I make a distinction between dry fire and dry practice. And I sometimes get into trouble because I'm not a big fan of dry fire as a skill development or a skill maintenance technique. I'm with Rob. If you want to maintain your skills, or if you want to build your skills, you have to shoot ammunition. I'm sorry, that's the only way to do it. I think that dry practice has, however, some benefits. For instance, if you want to practice getting to that gun under certain layers of clothing, I think that's a good thing that you can do, certainly at home. Practice getting the gun. How do I get this thing out of the way? That sort of thing, how do I get out of the holster efficiently? I think that's certainly good. I think the value of dry practice is, again, identifying very specific things that you can do that don't rely on the feedback from the gun or the responsibility for getting the hit on target.
Okay. Derek?
Yeah, I agree with both of them. The one thing I see a lot on the range is that's where a lot of bad habits are, that bad last rep, because they were sitting in their basement practicing the reload, practicing, trigger control, but then you put them on the range and that last, they always drive out after a reload. And maybe they get the hit, maybe they don't get the hit, maybe they just throw the gun out there. So it's really bad practice that they're getting, instead of being very deliberate on what they want to train, if they're going to not be on the range training.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is there, if you're practicing on targets and at indoor range, Jack is asking what distance should he set his targets at for indoor best practice with a semi-automatic handgun? Should he shoot from 5 yards, 25 yards for different skill development? Does it matter? Can you just kind of discuss that?
Derek, go ahead. Reverse order.
Derek first. The indoor outdoor doesn't really matter, right? We should be using the same distances indoors that we would outdoor, right? That 9 to 12 feet out to 20 feet, 25 feet, whatever. But using balance of speed and precision, right? Varying it up between that high center chest target as well, and then the smaller precise target. It doesn't really change indoor or outdoor, in my opinion. Grant?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. There's really no difference between indoor and outdoor. Practice at the ranges, at the distances that you reasonably expect to encounter problems. we talk a lot about the work that Tom Givens did, and has done rather, in debriefing people that were actually in defensive shootings in his hometown of Memphis, Tennessee. And he found out that, gee, most of these things happen between, about 3 yards and about, 7 or 8 yards, right in that sort of range, about 86% of them. And so we first practice at those ranges. There's sometimes this feeling that, well, if I want to become a good shooter, I practice at really long ranges, and that will make me really good up close. And that's just not the case. Because what happens is you get used to shooting very, very slowly at that long range, and then when you get up to that close range where you could be shooting a whole heck of a lot faster and still get the hits on target, you don't. Instead, you concentrate on making that nice little group in paper, which is not a really good use of your time in a defensive shooting. So shoot at those typical, plausible distances. The other thing I would say is that if you're practicing for home defense, practice at the range across the biggest room in your house. That's an important thing as well. Sometimes we miss that. Now, I don't live in a big house. I don't have really big rooms. But, somebody like Derek, who lives in a mansion and has these, 100-foot rooms, probably needs to practice at that distance.
True story. I think the other thing to throw in there, aside from a plug for Tom Givens, also one of our PDN contributors, we have a DVD called Lessons from the Street, which is sort of a highlights reel of that data that Grant was talking about. That's some of our Personal Defense Network training library stuff. I think it's also important to remember that when you begin to expand beyond the fundamentals, that size of the target issue that Grant was talking about is really important, right? Shooting at a 1-inch target, what's the 1-inch target? When is that plausible? Shooting at a 100-yard target away, when is that really plausible? When is that a thing? And a lot of people want to interchange those two variables. They want to shoot at a smaller target at closer ranges and try to simulate the shooting at a normal size, maybe a chest-sized target at further ranges, and that's not really how it works. So you want to be careful about that indoor as well. You can't just shrink your target size down. The geometry may be the same, but the psychology, the way I see it affects students on the range, thousands of students, thousands of classes over a long period of time, distance affects students differently than size, and obviously students is us, human beings. So when it comes to shooting a gun, shoot at plausible sized targets, center of the head, high center chest for defensive targets at plausible distances.
Okay. So we had quite a few questions come in from people that have some sort of a disability, whether they're growing older, they're in a wheelchair, they have a cane. Should they be training any differently? A lot of the questions, they were wondering if there was training specific to people with disabilities. I'm wondering if you could speak about that, if there's a difference in training or how they could do that.
There are people out there who definitely cater their classes to that market, some of whom are mobility limited, disabled, whatever the proper terminology for their specific circumstance is. But what I have found in working with them, including Jake Romo, who did a DVD with us on people in wheelchairs, limited mobility defense, another one of our DVDs. When we worked with him, and he's out of, he actually is a guy who knows Tom Givens really well. Tom Givens introduced us. He's out of Memphis also. And one of the things that he said, and everybody else I've talked to in that realm, is the disabilities are so specific that to come up with a curriculum, you can say, okay, if you're in a wheelchair, here's some general ideas. But are you in a wheelchair and you have a lot of upper body strength? Are you in a wheelchair without a lot of upper body strength? Where in your torso do you lose control and balance? Do you have your legs? Do you not have your legs? Do you have one leg? What type of wheelchair environment are you in? Are you in an urban environment, in a rural environment? There are so many variables that the best practice from the best instructors in that part of it, and including the ones on our team at the Combat Focused Shooting and Advanced Pistol Handling program, we have to cater all of that stuff to the individual. And this is where fundamentally that's what we do every day, right? So we cater our classes to every individual. Somebody's thinner or fatter or older or younger or taller or shorter, whatever, it doesn't matter. We have to cater everything we're doing to the people on the line. And we certainly cater our classes to the 90% of the humans that are going to show up. And that means all your hands, all your fingers, both hands, all your fingers, you got your legs, and you have generally, the expected range of human mobility and range of motion. If that doesn't happen, then we have to start changing things. So I think it's inappropriate. A lot of people set themselves up for failure. And Derek mentioned it earlier, like women in holsters, and there need to be more women's holsters. Well, I see hundreds of women on the range every year with quote unquote normal holsters, not specialized holsters, and they aren't dressing around them. I know a lot of women who carry guns on a daily basis using exactly the same types of holsters that I've used and other men have used of different varying sizes and builds. So when you set it up as I'm this, so I need special training, or I'm this and I need special gear, there may be a lot of people, especially people with a profit motive, telling you that yes, that's true, come to me, I've got just the thing for you. But I think what you're going to find, most professionals will say everyone's an individual. Let's find out what you're capable of, and then have you use the tactics, the techniques, the gear, and the training methodologies that suit you. And not feel like you're going to be lumped into a category because of gender, age, mobility, or any of those kinds of things.
Okay. Any comments from Grant or Derek?
Well, since I'm the oldest one here, and yeah, thanks a lot, Rob. Appreciate it. Yeah, I love you too. I think from an individual standpoint, if the individual is looking at this and saying, what can I do? Part of it is identifying what is happening to you physically that necessitates some change. Now, for instance, very common one, glasses here, and I can't see a damn thing without them. And a lot of people, as they get older, for instance, their eyesight goes. And we were talking about lasers earlier, and that lasers are sometimes a situational accessory. It may be that if you need the precision that sights will give you, and you can no longer use your sights, maybe a laser is a really good idea here. Things like that. If you find limited strength and dexterity in your hands, maybe that double action revolver or that old-fashioned double action autoloader isn't for you anymore. Maybe you need something with a trigger that's a little easier to pull. A Glock or a M&P or something like that is easier for you to manipulate. So you really, from an individual standpoint, have to look at what's going on with my aging, what's getting affected, and what changes do I need to make. And sometimes that means getting rid of a favorite piece of gear or a favorite way of doing something and doing something else that works better.
Okay. Derek, any comments?
Just to expand on what Rob said, all of our combat-focused shooting classes, we point out, physical comfort, and we talk to the students about it, so we make sure they understand, they need to let us know, and we will tailor what we think is the most efficient way to fit whatever disability or limitation they have. And it's really important, if you're going to go out and get professional training, to find an instructor that recognizes that and works with it.
Okay. All right, this next question is from Gene. He's asking, what is going on with smart guns? What are the positive, negatives, and situation with the law in New Jersey? I'm not sure if any of you can speak to the law in New Jersey, but if you could speak to the smart gun issue.
I left New Jersey in 1987 and haven't had to worry so much about the laws there in a long time. I think the issue of smart guns in general, I can talk about a little bit. Anytime you make a gun harder to use, or you introduce extra failure points in the gun, you're making it less appropriate for personal defense. So making a gun, and Grant just talked about the double action revolver, which everybody says, well, the double action revolver is incredibly reliable, it's going to go bang when you need it to, but we know that it can be hard to use because of that long, heavy double action trigger pull. So, combinations of easy to use and reliable are really what we're looking for. And a gun that it has a piece of technology, whether it's mechanical, like, the ring that you put on that interacts with the base of a trigger, or the top of a trigger, and allows you and only you wearing the ring to pull the trigger, all the way to, the James Bond, it reads your DNA print when you grab the gun and magically knows it's you and you're authorized to use it. Those types of things all get in the way of being able to use the gun reliably and efficiently. So for me, they're really a non-starter. Now, obviously, if there's a law that comes down and requires it, then we'll figure out the best way to do that as a firearms community. But right now, I don't think that's anywhere close to happening.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know anything about New Jersey's situation. I know some people from New Jersey, but that's as close as I think I've ever gotten to the state. The issue, when it comes right down to it, and when you think about it, modern firearms are really incredibly reliable devices. In fact, it's really, really hard to find any other consumer item that you can go buy that is as reliable over as long a period of time as a typical modern handgun is, or rifle for that matter. And they're reliable for a reason, because the consequences of not being able to use them can be severe. And so when we start looking at putting stuff into it, particularly electronics, and we're talking about electronics that are going to be subject to temperature extremes and certainly a lot of shock when the gun fires, you don't make anything more reliable by adding parts to it. That's just sort of an engineering maxim. And I have a real problem with the idea of putting anything into a design that has that increases the failure rate. And so like Rob said, if it comes down, we'll certainly work with it. But from my standpoint, I would do everything from a legislative or a lobbying standpoint I could do to keep that from happening, because I think the consequences, the unintended consequences like that, are huge.
Okay. Derek, any comments?
I know nothing about New Jersey. I moved south from Maryland. I agree with Grant and Rob. I don't like using technology to replace somebody's responsibility. Personal responsibility. You don't need technology in the way to make a gun unreliable. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. This next question is from Todd, and it's apparently specifically for Grant. It says, I've seen several methods being taught for holding a revolver when reloading. Do you have a recommended method?
Can you repeat that? My audio went out for just a second.
Oh, sure. It's from Todd. I've seen several methods being taught for holding a revolver when reloading. Do you have a recommended method?
I like to approach this from a conceptual standpoint. I'm okay with any revolver reloading technique that somebody does, as long as a few things happen. Number one, that they're able to immobilize the cylinder for both unloading the cylinder and reloading it. That they don't use their thumb to eject the empties from the cylinder, and they put new ammunition back into the cylinder using their strongest and most dexterous hand, which is usually their shooting hand. Beyond that, I'm not really doctrinaire about how they go about doing it. What I found is that holding the cylinder, I'm a right-handed shooter, so holding the cylinder in my left hand with my fingers encircling it to immobilize it, using my right hand to slap the ejector rod, and then rotating the muzzle downward to point at the ground, and using my right hand again to put ammunition into the cylinder works best. There are some variations of that some people use, but that has all three of the things that I look for: immobilizing the cylinder, using something other than your thumb to eject the empties, and using your strong hand to get ammunition back into the cylinder.
Okay. Rob or Derek, any comments?
I defer revolver questions to Grant anyway.
I teach students Grant's way of reloading a revolver if and when they ever do show up to my classes, so I defer to Grant.
Okay. Okay. So let's see. This next one is from Steven. It says, what is the recommended procedure after you've survived a self-defense shooting and waiting for the police to arrive? Do you defend yourself without getting shot by the police? Or how do you defend yourself without being shot by the police?
Grant.
The first thing I'd recommend is that if you're interested in this whole use of force thing and interaction with police, there are a lot of really good resources out there. PDN put out a really good DVD on this very topic that I reviewed just a couple of weeks ago, about dealing with the police in the aftermath of the shooting, or dealing with police in general. You've just been in a shooting, and you've got to remember that the police are going to roll up on the scene, hearing that somebody has been shot, and you're standing there with your gun in your hand. You're doing, as Masad Ayub calls it, a very, very good imitation of a crook, because somebody's been shot and you're holding the gun. I think the first thing is that after you're safe, after the threats have been dealt with, that there's no more shooting to be done, this isn't the time when you really need to start looking around. You need to start doing a search of your environment 360 degrees, not just because we're looking for other threats, but to see what's going on around you. Are the police arriving? Are they running up with their guns drawn? In these situations, the usual response is, okay, go ahead and reholster that gun, put your hands up. There might be a situation where the bad guy is still moving. He still isn't a threat right now, but could very quickly become one again, and you might want to keep your gun out. Now you have a problem because you're holding a gun and the police are running up. That might be a very, very good time to back off from the scene, get away from the downed fellow enough that he can't jump up and grab your gun, and maybe put the gun on the deck or put the gun someplace where he can't get it, and then put your hands up. This is a really tricky situation because that potential for a mistaken good guy shooting is very, very high. You need to think very, very carefully. I would recommend, when at all possible, when it's safe to do so, put the gun in your holster and keep your hands where the cops can see them. Now, Rob was a police officer. I never have been, so he may have a different perspective on this.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that was a great overview. The idea is two things. You know, once you survive the initial threat with the bad guy, you want to make sure that you don't get shot by the police, and you want to make sure you don't get arrested if you can avoid it. So both of those things are going to be helped by proper behavior, cooperating with law enforcement. One thing we teach fundamentally is we don't teach any extended ready positions. I don't really think there's a lot of good reason to extend the gun away from your body when you're not shooting. So one thing you can do is you can have just right away, if you always train in a compressed ready position, it has the gun in close to your body, you look much less like that crook, right? So that perspective that Mossad brings, and we all recommend, I think, Mossad Ayoub's 20-hour class, MAG 20, is a great mindset class and an aftermath survival class. But I know that Mossad teaches several ready positions, as I understand his live fire class, and when I've seen him teach, including some extended ones. Well, if you were extending the gun and pointing it at someone, yes, you are doing a great impression of the bad guy about to shoot someone. If you're pulling the gun back to your chest, and if the gun's pointed down in front of your feet, you do a much less impression of someone who's being aggressive and antagonistic. So something as simple as your technique in the aftermath might actually help you avoid getting shot. And then obviously, cooperating, surrendering, doing all that stuff, and letting the police know that there was a crime happening and something worse would have happened if you hadn't acted. You would have been hurt. Another innocent person would have been hurt. You had to take action. Pointing out that evidence and trying to keep yourself from getting arrested is important too. Not just put into custody, but formally arrested is what you're trying to avoid. You should expect to be put in custody and have your gun taken, of course.
Okay. Okay, so then this next question is from John, sort of on that same wavelength, except if you're in your house. So what happens after you use a firearm against someone in your house? Most people have an idea what happens to the bad guys, but if you use a firearm to defend yourself in your house against a man with a knife, then what happens to you if you use a gun against them in your house?
I don't see. Oh, Derek, go ahead.
It doesn't really change from what Grant said, other than you're in your house.
Yeah.
Don't touch evidence, right? You want to remain safe, So you basically follow exactly what Grant said and what Rob said. It doesn't really change much. You're just in your house. Am I missing something, Rob? Grant?
No, in fact, that's a good thing you bring up. Is there are two things. I think there are two don'ts here. Don't touch any evidence, and I'm glad you brought that up, because sometimes, well, should I take the knife from him? Should I do this, that? No, don't touch the evidence. If the knife is still near the bad guy, back off, get away, but don't touch the damn knife. Don't touch any evidence. The other thing is, don't clam up and demand to see your lawyer and say something like, I'm not going to talk unless I got my mouthpiece here. Don't do that either. As Rob said, point out the evidence. Here's the bad guy. Here's what he did, and yeah, I know this is really, a serious situation. I'll be glad to talk to you more after I've had a chance to talk with counsel. But don't just clam up and say, I demand a lawyer. Lawyering up is a really bad idea at that point in time.
And in case anyone's tuning in that is for some reason not familiar with personaldefensenetwork.com, this is a great topic that we have talked about a lot. We've done a conversation with Marty Hayes of the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. We've done some demonstrations. There's a show I did a couple years ago called Trigger Time, where I went through the whole season with 13 episodes dealing with home defense situations. And we actually repurposed that material and put all 13 of those segments on personaldefensenetwork.com, so people can go there and look up immediate aftermath or dealing with the police and seeing some of the recommendations we make there.
Okay. And we only have time for a couple more questions. This sort of leads from the last one. Should people who have concealed carry, should they have a particular type of insurance? Does that matter? Could you just maybe talk about insurance coverage and if it's needed or not?
Let's jump on that, guys.
I can talk about that a little bit. Keep in mind that if you're involved in a self-defense shooting, the chances of you needing to get a lawyer are probably pretty high. Now, the fact is, if you're in a defensive shooting, it will go to the prosecutor's office or it will go before a grand jury, depending upon your jurisdiction. And you may need to speak with a lawyer. You're going to need to probably have one on hand to deal with all that sort of legal stuff that happens. And I'm not a lawyer. I don't pretend to be a lawyer. I've served on, I've testified in front of a couple of grand juries, and that's about the extent of it. But at the point that the prosecutor gets a hold of things and people start to look at evidence and try to decide if they're going to take you to trial, that's about the time that you really need to have a lawyer on hand and be able to talk to them. There are a lot of different programs out there, some insurance and that kind of thing. As I'm looking at one, I want one that will get me the lawyer that I need and that will pay that lawyer so that I don't have to take out a mortgage on my house just to get him to look at my case. I think those things are really important. The disclaimer here, I'm a member of and an associate of the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network, and I have been since its inception. And for me, that's the best choice. There are other programs out there that you can look at. I think it is important, though, because the financial costs of having to deal with a defensive shooting, even if you're completely innocent and nothing happens to you and you're blessed by the prosecutor, all that sort of thing, you're still going to have some legal bills. And you need to factor that into your planning. And yes, I think it's a good idea to have some sort of plan out there, be it insurance or something, a reimbursement program like the ACLDN. But I think it's important to have something.
Derek, you have insurance?
I did. I was with USCCA for a while, and they have the 3 different tiers of insurance. I was with that for a while, and then I sort of let it lapse. And then I moved to Florida. I always keep a lawyer that I know is well versed in the Second Amendment and personal defense arena. I spend the hour of talking to him, have his number in my wallet, so I'm always ready. But it is something I need to look back into. It was sort of like cost and value type thing.
Yeah, I know a lot of people. This has been something that this really wasn't an issue 5 years ago, and because the services are now available through so many different venues that are advertising pretty aggressively in some cases to the community, it's a question that comes up more and more often. I have in the past had the USCCA policy. I carry around the CCW Safe, made me an honorary life member of their service, so I do carry this kind of really cool metal card. They with very sharp edges around in my wallet. I also have a policy through Lockton that's offered by the NRA, and we've really been looking at this. I personally and Personal Defense Network has been looking at this a lot more seriously and a lot harder because so many people are now enticed by the opportunity to find ways to offset their costs that they see coming in the aftermath. And if you have home insurance, and you have car insurance, and you have health insurance, and you have life insurance, and you're carrying a gun, then this may appeal to you as a product. So I've had to get a lot more serious about researching it. I'm also affiliated with Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network for a number of years. Again, worked with Marty Hayes as a contributor to PDN, and have distributed their information and been a fan and recommended Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network since it came out. And I actually did use it to source a lawyer when I needed to consult a lawyer on a certain event. and they hooked me up with 2 options, and I contacted the lawyer, and it was Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network, Say No More, cool, let's have a conversation, and ended up really, it was a very high quality lawyer, and still keep him on retainer for certain things. So Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network has been great. Personal Defense Network and again, IC Training Company, Combat Focus Shooting, our whole community has been looking at this as a more serious thing that we should be able to give a better recommendation on. So it's an area of study that I've taken very seriously over, let's say, the last 3 or 4 months. I'm getting much more well versed in it, besides just the invitations I get to participate in certain programs. And I will say, stay tuned for more information on our thoughts on insurance through Personal Defense Network coming up later this year.
Cool. All right. So as we wind down here, we tend to get a ton of questions about hair products and facial hair and products that Rob uses, but this one is directly for Grant. It's from, from CB Demented on Twitter. He's asking, what hair products does Grant use on his flowing hippie mane?
I hate you, Cecil. Just remember, I hate you. I use whatever's in the shower. Whatever my wife buys, I use, because I really don't care. This wonderfulness is natural, Cecil, and I'm just sorry that you don't have this sort of wonderful hair like I do. I feel for you, buddy.
And then we're all wondering why you aren't on Instagram yet, Grant.
I actually have an Instagram account. I got it to follow one guy, and I don't. In fact, I don't. I was really surprised because I discovered you can't really do anything on Instagram on the web. You actually have to have the app someplace to do something with, and too much trouble, too much bother. I got things to do. I got a life to live. Got things going on.
Do you have a smartphone?
Of course, I've got the Instagram app on my smartphone, so I can follow this one guy.
Well, it's not that hard. It's fine. I can teach you. It's fine. So, Rob, are you going to be answering questions on YouTube after we're done here?
Yeah, so I'll jump on, and I would invite Grant and Derek also to jump in. We always get a lot of kind of comments. Always the one time we did this before, we got a lot of great comments and questions following up our hour live. So I'll probably off and on over the next hour jump in and see what questions people are posting, and certainly give some answers and some responses. Sonia, I appreciate you putting this together. We didn't really talk about it much at the beginning, but these were completely unscripted, obviously, in some cases very obviously, unscripted answers, and this is the first time we've had guests. We've had other Personal Defense Network contributors, so one thing I'll be looking for from those who are watching this, not only live here Thursday night, but people who watch on the YouTube as this immediately becomes available for viewing and streaming. We hope that you, recommend this to your friends. Post it on your Facebook pages, your Twitter, your Instagrams, whatever. Let people know in the forums that you frequent, hey, check this out. Here was if you thought it was valuable, here's a valuable conversation with some guys from PDN, and share this information with others. And also, I'd like your feedback on our social media pages at PD Network is our Instagram, P_D_.
Oh, it's backwards. Never mind. It's backwards. Sorry.
P_D_N is our Twitter, and then obviously Personal Defense Network at Facebook. Let us know what you thought of the formats, comparing when we did it last month to this month. Just me, or me and guests, or maybe you'd rather just see other contributors, maybe just Grant at some point, or some of the other guys that we have. And just do you like it better as a group, or do you like it better individual? Is really the question, and we'll figure that out as we go. This is our second one. The numbers I'm seeing and the feedback we're seeing as this is going on online, I'm very happy with, proud of it. I think this was a great addition to Personal Defense Network, and I appreciate you putting it all together, Simon.
Oh, no problem. So I guess that's it. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll let everybody know the next time we have one.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Night.
Good night.